once if you had asked me Aiden professional disaster how I imagined dying, I would not have said, tripping into a Mafia boss and kissing him in the rain. But here I was, a testament to the universe's twisted sense of humor. Rain lashed down, cold needles pricking my exposed skin, plastering my cheap t-shirt to my chest. My lungs burned, each gasp for air a ragged tear in the damp night. Behind me, a rhythmic thudding pounded the pavement, the sound of a debt collector built like a refrigerator with anger issues. He was a human avalanche, and I was the unfortunate pebble in his path, Aiden. Pay up, his roar, thick with menace, sliced through the downpour. I'm emotionally rich, I yelled back, a breathless, desperate plea that was not only unhelpful, but probably sounded like a mating call to his particular brand of fury. My legs churned, muscles screaming in protest, but adrenaline, my oldest friend, propelled me forward. I rounded a corner, the greasy sheen of a dark alley stretching before me, a tunnel promising escape or, more likely, a dead end. Then, I slammed into something solid. Not something. Someone. A wall of tailored charcoal wool, immovable, emanating an aura that felt colder than the rain. My momentum, combined with the slick pavement, sent my feet skidding out from under me. My hand, flailing wildly, snagged on a silk tie, a desperate anchor. The man, a towering silhouette against the city's blurred neon, bent slightly as I went down, his face descending towards mine. My lips, cold and chapped, crashed into his. For 3 seconds, the world stopped. The rain faded, the debt collector's bellow became a distant echo, replaced by the frantic drum of my own heart against my ribs. His mouth, firm and unyielding, tasted faintly of expensive cigars and something metallic, like the coppery tang of the storm. His eyes, when I finally focused past the shock, were twin shards of obsidian, sharp and furious, burning into mine. Then a blinding flash ripped through the sky, lightning striking somewhere dramatically close. A theatrical flourish from a universe apparently obsessed with symbolism. The ground beneath me seemed to liquefy, my head swam in a dizzying vortex of light and sound. And then, mercifully, darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke, the world was a blur of soft, sterile white. The ceiling above me, pristine and unforgiving, mocked the chaotic mess of my life. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, a souvenir from my impromptu kiss with gravity. My body felt heavy, too heavy, like someone had filled my limbs with concrete. I pushed myself up, a groan rumbling deep in my chest, a sound that fell foreign, deeper than my usual reedy sigh. Nurses, their faces a tableau of starched white and mild surprise, gasped. One dropped a clipboard, the clatter echoing in the hushed room. Why were they gasping? I looked down. Broad chest, not my chest. Muscular arms, corded with definition I'd only ever dreamed of. A dark, intricate tattoo snaked up one bicep, patterns I'd never seen before. This was not my body. My stomach lurched. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. Across the room, on an identical bed, someone else sat up slowly. A smaller frame, almost delicate. Soft features dot my face. My own familiar, slightly bewildered face stared back at me. But the expression, terrifying. A cold, hard mask of fury I'd never been capable of producing. You, my own voice, crisp and chilling, sliced through the air. Explain. Oh no. Oh no no no. That was Dominic Valentino, the Mafia boss. In my body, my new throat bobbed, a deep, resonant voice, completely alien, spilled from my lips. I squeaked, the word feeling ridiculously small. In this cavernous new chest, we switched. Silence descended, thick and suffocating, the kind of silence that precedes an execution, the kind that makes you want to crawl into the nearest dark corner and beg for mercy. The obsidian eyes, now set in my familiar face, narrowed. I braced myself for the inevitable. The hospital room, once a sanctuary of antiseptic calm, now pulsed with a silent, terrifying energy. Dominic, his face my face, stared at me, his eyes my eyes cold as glacier ice. The silence stretched, thin and brittle, threatening to shatter. My heart hammered against the unfamiliar cage of Dominic's ribs. I felt. The tremor started in my hands, large and powerful, but completely alien. Switched. The word, coming from my own mouth, sounded alien too. It was a low growl, laced with disbelief and something far more dangerous. He pushed himself off the bed, his smaller frame moving, with a predatory grace I'd never possessed. The nurses, frozen like statues, seemed to shrink further into the walls. Yes, I blurted, my voice booming in this new body, a shock even to my own ears. I flinched, pulling back. I think so. I was running, and then I hit you, and then the kiss, and the lightning, and now, this. I gestured wildly with Dominic's hand, the movement feeling clumsy, uncoordinated. He stalked towards me, his gaze never leaving mine. It was like watching a miniature, incredibly intense version of myself approaching. Every instinct screamed to cower, to apologize, to make myself small, but this body, this powerful, imposing body, refused to obey. It stood tall, shoulders broad, a statue of terrified muscle. A kiss, he repeated, the words dripping with disdain, a venomous whisper from my own lips. He stopped directly in front of me, forcing me to look down at my own face, contorted with a fury I knew I could never muster. You're telling me, he continued, his voice dangerously soft, that because you, a detritus disaster, he spat the words like a curse, tripped and kissed me, we are now inhabiting each other's flesh. It sounds ridiculous, I know, I pleaded, my hands rising in a placating gesture. This body's hands, they felt heavy, capable of crushing. But look, my body, your face, your body. My face, it's the only explanation. He reached out, a single finger, my finger, touching his jawline. His touch was cold, analytical. I felt a shiver, not of pleasure, but of profound unease. My jawline, he murmured, his voice a loathsome against my skin. The scar above the left eyebrow. The strength, he clenched his fist, my fist, and I watched the muscles tense. This is my body. Then his eyes, my eyes, snapped back to mine. And this, he said, a deadly calm in his tone, is my face. The nurses, finally finding their voices, started murmuring, their hushed tones growing louder. Mr. Valentino, are you all right? One ventured, stepping forward hesitantly. Dominic, in my body, turned his head slightly, and the low growl that emanated from my own throat made the woman freeze mid-step. Leave us, he commanded. His voice, my voice, was imbued with an authority I'd never heard it possess. The nurses scurried out, their whispers fading down the hall. He turned back to me. This is a complication, he stated, his eyes narrowing. A significant, unprecedented complication. He paced, a restless energy emanating from him, even in my smaller frame. What is your name, Aiden? Aiden Hart. Aiden Hart, he repeated, testing the syllables. And what do you do? Aiden Hart. I work. Odd jobs. I owe some money to a guy named Muscles. A flicker of something amusement. Disgust crossed his features. Muscles, he scoffed. Pathetic, he stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on me. You will come with me. To my residence. Your mansion, I squeaked. But I can't. I don't know how to be you. You will learn, he said. His voice clipped. Absolute. Or you will die. You understand. I understood. The choice was clear. Terrified compliance or immediate expiration. I nodded. A jerky movement of Dominic's head. He led the way out of the hospital, somehow managing to look even more intimidating in my smaller body than I ever had. He moved with a quiet intensity that drew stares, but no one dared approach. His bodyguards, to hulking men in dark suits, materialized the moment we stepped into the hallway, their eyes instantly scanning the surroundings. They looked at me and Dominic's body with a mixture of deference and confusion, then at the smaller figure beside me, and my body with a respect that surprised me. They knew who commanded them, regardless of the vessel. The car, Dominic instructed, his voice low. The ride to the mansion was a blur of silent apprehension. I sat in the back of a black, armored SUV, feeling ridiculously oversized and out of place. Dominic, in my body, sat beside me, radiating an aura of dangerous calm. He occasionally glanced at me, a silent threat in his eyes, as if daring me to make a wrong move. The city lights streamed past, painting fleeting patterns on the tinted windows. I focused on my breathing, trying to calm the frantic flutter in my chest. The Valentino mansion loomed into view, a monstrous edifice of dark stone and polished glass, perched on a hill like a predatory bird surveying its domain. It was even more imposing than I'd imagined. A fortress, not a home. We swept through massive iron gates, the crunch of gravel beneath the tires the only sound in the oppressive silence. The front doors, carved from ancient dark wood, swung open before we even reached them, revealing a cavernous hall. Inside, the air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of old money and unspoken power. Dark marble floors stretched endlessly, reflecting the cold glow of hidden lights. Black and gold decor dominated, stark and uninviting. Every surface gleamed, devoid of warmth of any personal touch. It was less a home, more a mausoleum. A line of men in sharp suits stood waiting, their faces impassive. They bowed as Dominic and my body entered, then glanced at me, their boss, with a subtle shift in their eyes. They must have sensed something was off, but their discipline held. My office, Dominic commanded, his voice echoing in the vast space. He didn't wait for me, simply turned and walked, his smaller frame moving with an unnatural authority. I followed, feeling like a clumsy giant. The office was equally grand, a dark expanse of leather and polished wood. He sat behind a massive desk, gesturing for me to stand opposite. You will remain here, he stated, his eyes fixed on me. You will act as me. You will speak as me. You will learn everything. And you will not, under any circumstances, reveal this situation. Do you understand? Yes, I whispered, my voice still booming, still alien. Good, he rose, walked to the door, and then turned, his gaze sweeping over my new body, lingering on the broad shoulders, the powerful arms. This body, he said, a note of possessiveness in his voice, is a tool. It is a weapon. Do not disgrace it. With that, he exited, leaving me alone in the silent, imposing room. The next few days were a blur of terror and confusion. I wandered the mansion, a giant lost in a labyrinth of cold luxury. The staff, a small army of housekeepers, chefs, and bodyguards, treated me with a deference that was both unsettling and vaguely amusing. They called me boss, their voices hushed, their eyes never quite meeting mine. One morning, a bodyguard, a mountain of a man named Marco, approached me in the kitchen. I was trying to figure out how to operate the industrial-sized coffee machine. Boss, he rumbled, his voice deep enough to vibrate the expensive china. He held out a sleek, black handgun for inspection, boss. I stared at it. The cold, metallic gleam, the deadly curves. It stared back. My stomach churned. This was not a spatula. This was not a whisk. I let out a high-pitched squeak, a sound completely out of place coming from Dominic's formidable frame, and dropped it like it was a live grenade. The gun clattered to the marble floor, the sharp report echoing like a gunshot itself. 3 guards, who had been silently observing from the doorway, flinched as if I'd fired it. Marco's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his usually impassive face. I don't like it, I whispered, my voice barely audible. My hands trembled. You don't like guns? Marco asked slowly, his voice laced with careful disbelief, as if I'd just announced a preference for polka-dotted tactical gear. I shook my head vigorously. No, I prefer spatulas. I pointed vaguely towards a drawer filled with gleaming kitchen utensils. Or maybe a good whisk? Something for cooking. Marco exchanged a bewildered glance with the other guards. Their expressions ranged from utter confusion to suppressed amusement. I could practically hear the gears grinding in their heads, trying to reconcile this bizarre behavior with the ruthless Dominic Valentino they knew. That was the beginning of my villain arc, or more accurately, my domestic goddess arc. Within a week, the mansion began to subtly change. The weapons room in the basement, a grim chamber filled with racks of firearms and ammunition, now housed potted plants, small, vibrant green things basking under grow lights. The air, once thick with the smell of gun oil, now carried the faint, earthy scent of damp soil and nascent life. The dining hall, a place usually reserved for hushed business dinners, started smelling like cookies. Specifically, chocolate chip cookies, baked with a slightly burnt bottom because I was still getting used to the mansion's industrial oven. I even ordered a custom pink apron. It was silk, of course, because this body only wore the finest, but undeniably, irrevocably pink. The embroidered message across the chest read, * kiss the cook, but gently, * the chef. A stern Frenchman named Antoine nearly had an aneurysm when he saw me wearing it, bustling around his pristine kitchen. Meanwhile, Dominic inside my body took over the Mafia operations with a chilling efficiency. He attended meetings looking like a delicate omega, all soft features and slender limbs, but radiating pure alpha dominance. Rival gang members, accustomed to my clumsy, apologetic demeanor, laughed once. Just once. They stopped when he broke a man's wrist with terrifying precision during a tense negotiation. The crack of bone was reportedly audible across the room. I do not require size to command fear, he had said calmly, his voice, my voice, now imbued with a lethal edge. The story spread like wildfire through the underworld. My small body, now a vessel for a ruthless mind, became a symbol of unexpected, brutal power. I was so proud, and slightly terrified. The first time Dominic found out I had replaced a bullet storage cabinet with herb seedlings, a small basil plant proudly taking root where once hundreds of rounds lay, he went quiet. That's worse than yelling. His silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket that pressed down on the entire mansion. He dragged me, his body, my consciousness, to his office. The same office where he had given his initial warning. The air crackled with unspoken fury. He stood before me, my own face a mask of cold displeasure. Kneel, he commanded, his voice, my voice, a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. What? I stammered, my heart leaping into my throat. On the keyboard, he clarified, pointing to the expensive, ergonomic keyboard on his desk. I started, but the look in his eyes, my eyes, silenced me. Kneel, I knelt. The keys dug into my knees, sharp plastic prongs pressing against bone. Random letters typed themselves into his laptop, a nonsensical stream of characters. Hands up, he ordered, his voice unwavering. I raised them, feeling ridiculous. Dominic, pacing back and forth in front of me inside my much smaller body, began his lecture. It stretched for 10 agonizing minutes, a relentless torrent of words about Mafia legacy, the sacred discipline of the syndicate, and the psychological damage of basil plants in ammunition drawers. "You are the head of an empire," he snapped, his voice rising, my voice sounding utterly furious. "I made rosemary chicken for dinner last night," I offered weakly, remembering the delicious, fragrant meal I prepared for the household staff. "This is not a restaurant," he roared, my hands gesturing wildly. "It could be," I mumbled, a new idea sparking, a really good one, with a secret speakeasy in the basement where the weapons used to be. His eye twitched, a full-blown tick just above my left eyebrow. The guards outside, I knew, were pretending not to hear, their faces probably frozen in expressions of professional indifference. The silence that followed was punctuated only by the distant hum of the mansion's expensive fix system and the faint scent of basil wafting from the repurposed weapons room. I wondered if he could smell it, too. The silence following my speakeasy suggestion stretched thin, taut as a violin's string before snapping. Dominic, in my body, stood absolutely still, his eye twitching a furious rhythm. My knees ached from the keyboard. The air in the office crackled with an unspoken tension, thick enough to chew. "A speakeasy," he finally articulated, the words clipped, each syllable a tiny blade. My own voice. The lace was such withering contempt it made me shiver. "In the weapons room." "Well, it's not a weapons room anymore," I pointed out, trying to sound reasonable, trying to ignore the tremor in my voice. "It's an herb garden, and the acoustics are actually quite good down there. We could have live jazz on Tuesdays." He took a slow, deliberate step towards me, my gaze, boring into mine. "You are testing my patience, Aiden Hart." "No, I'm just trying to make this place homey," I insisted, feeling a surge of stubbornness. "It's so cold, and all the staff look like they're waiting for a firing squad. Nobody smiles." Dominic's expression remained unreadable, but the twitch above his eye intensified. He turned abruptly, walking back to his desk and picking up a pristine, silver-framed photograph. It showed a stern-faced man, undoubtedly his father, standing beside a younger, equally unsmiling Dominic. "This is not a home," he said, his voice softer now, almost wistful. "It is a legacy, a fortress built on generations of discipline." He set the photo down with a precise click. "And you are turning it into a botanical garden with jazz nights. And what's wrong with that?" I challenged, pushing myself up from the keyboard. My knees screamed in protest, but I ignored them. People like nice things. They like to feel safe and happy. He finally looked at me, a long, assessing gaze that seemed to strip away my borrowed grandeur and peer directly into my soul. "Happiness is a luxury we cannot afford," he stated, his voice flat. "Maybe you just haven't tried hard enough to afford it," I retorted, surprising myself with the boldness. That night, I retreated to his bedroom, a vast space that felt more like a museum exhibit than a place to sleep. I lay awake for hours. The weight of Dominic's body, the responsibility of his empire, pressing down on me, but a seed had been planted. I couldn't just be Dominic Valentino. I had to be me, Aiden Hart, inside him. And something strange started happening. The staff, initially wary, slowly began to thaw. It started with small gestures. I learned their names. Not just their last names, but their first. I asked about their families, their hobbies. The stoic head of security, a man named Enzo with eyes that had seen too much, was startled when I remembered his daughter's birthday. "Boss, you remembered," he stammered, his gruff voice cracking. A single tear traced a path down his weathered cheek. He quickly wiped it away, embarrassed, but a genuine smile, a hesitant, fragile thing, touched his lips. "Of course, Enzo," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "How could I forget? Maria is turning 6, right? Did she like the unicorn plushie?" Enzo nodded, his eyes shining. She loved it, boss. She sleeps with it every night." The kitchen staff, initially terrified of my sudden appearance in their domain, began to relax. I baked cookies. I taught them how to make my grandmother's apple pie. The mansion, once a place of hushed whispers and rigid formality, now occasionally resonated with the sound of laughter, the clatter of pots and pans, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon wafting through its cold corridors. I planted roses in the courtyard, hundreds of them, crimson, blush pink, ivory. The gardeners, initially perplexed by my sudden horticultural obsession, followed my instructions, transforming the stark, geometric landscape into a riot of color and fragrance. And then there were the cats, 3 of them, scrawny, half-starved strays I found huddled near the back gate. During a rare moment of unsupervised exploration, I couldn't leave them. Dominic's bodyguards, accustomed to dealing with rival gangs and disgruntled subordinates, looked utterly bewildered as I, in their boss's imposing form, scooped up the trembling furballs. One afternoon, Dominic walked in on me in the grand foyer. He had been out, presumably dealing with some grim mafia business, and returned to find me his tall, terrifying body cooing softly at a tiny, fluffy kitten nestled against my chest. The other two, a ginger tabby and a sleek black cat, were batting playfully at my shoelaces. He froze in the doorway, a silhouette against the setting sun. His eyes, my eyes, widened fractionally. The air, which had been filled with the contented purr of kittens, suddenly grew thick with unspoken judgment. I named him Gunther, I said, lifting the kitten for his inspection. Gunther, a tiny gray ball of fluff, let out a surprisingly fierce hiss at the sight of my own face. Dominic stared. His gaze moved from the kitten to the other cats, then to the burgeoning rose garden visible through the arched windows. The mansion, once a mausoleum, now hummed with a different kind of life. You named a cat Gunther, he finally articulated, the words slow, deliberate, as if he were dissecting a complex philosophical problem. He's aggressive but soft inside, I explained, stroking Gunther's tiny head. The kitten kneaded my chest, purring loudly. Just like, well, you know. I winked. A long, drawn-out sigh escaped his lips, my lips. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, a strange, almost bewildered expression on his face. He looked at the mansion. It wasn't cold anymore. The stark black and gold were softened by the vibrant flowers, the scent of baking, the gentle murmur of contented staff. It felt alive. One night, everything shattered. The security alarms blared, a jarring, electronic shriek that ripped through the mansion's newfound tranquility. Red lights flashed, casting a hellish glow on the polished marble. A rival gang, the notorious Vipers, had launched a surprise attack on one of Dominic's key warehouses, a major distribution hub for, well, I didn't ask, but I assumed it wasn't artisanal cheese. Dominic didn't hesitate. He moved with a speed and decisiveness that was breathtaking, even in my smaller body. He barked orders, his voice, my voice, cutting through the chaos like a whip. He grabbed weapons from the emergency caches I hadn't yet replaced with succulents, his movements fluid, instinctive. He was a general leading his troops, and he was going personally. Stay here, he commanded, his eyes, my eyes, blazing with a cold fire. You are the boss. Your place is here, protecting the estate. But I couldn't. The thought of him, in my small, vulnerable body, going into a firefight, filled me with a terror far greater than any fear for my own safety. This was my body, the one I'd lived in for 23 years, the one that had tripped over air and apologized to vending machines. It wasn't built for this. No, I yelled, my voice booming from Dominic's chest. I'm coming with you. He turned, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Are you insane? You can barely hold a gun without screaming. I'm worried about you. The words burst out, raw and unbidden. He froze. His entire body, my body, stiffened. The cold fire in his eyes flickered, replaced by a flicker of something else. Surprise. Confusion? No one had said that to him in years, maybe ever. The silence between us, amidst the blaring alarms and shouting guards, was profound. I can't let you go alone, I insisted, pushing past him. I grabbed a tactical vest, fumbling with the buckles, and then a gun. It felt heavy, cold, terrifying, but the image of my small body, his merciless mind, walking into a hail of bullets, spurred me on. I had to protect him. I had to protect my body. The convoy of armored vehicles sped through the city streets, sirens wailing. A grim procession under the neon glow. I sat in the back seat, clutching the gun like a lifeline, my knuckles white. Dominic, in my body, sat beside me, his gaze fixed straight ahead, his face grim. He hadn't argued further, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. When we arrived at the warehouse, it was a scene of pandemonium. Gunshots cracked through the night air, punctuated by shouts and the splintering of wood. Flames licked at the edges of the building, casting dancing shadows. Stay behind cover, Dominic ordered, his voice sharp. He moved with lethal grace, a blur of motion, disarming men twice his size, his smaller frame weaving through the chaos, a deadly phantom. My body, executing moves it had never learned, never practiced, with terrifying precision. I, in his body, hid behind a massive crate, the gun feeling like a lead weight in my trembling hands. Every gunshot made me flinch. Every yell sent a jolt of terror through me. I hate this, I yelled, my voice swallowed by the din, but a raw, desperate cry of protest nonetheless. Dominic, a whirlwind of controlled violence, disarmed another Viper, sending him sprawling with a precise kick. He was a force of nature, utterly unstoppable. He was a testament to the fact that power wasn't about size, but about will. After what felt like an eternity, the firing subsided. The Vipers were routed, their retreat a chaotic mess. The warehouse was a wreck, but the Valentino forces had prevailed. Dominic, his clothes torn, a streak of grime on my cheek, walked towards me, his gaze still intense. You shouldn't be here, he said, his voice clipped, but lacking its usual venom. I was worried. I repeated, the words a desperate plea. He froze again, this time. The silence was different, softer. The raw emotion in my voice seemed to pierce through his carefully constructed defenses. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something akin to vulnerability in his eyes. My eyes. Back at the mansion, the medical team moved quickly, tending to the injured. Dominic, in my body, had several superficial cuts and bruises. I insisted on patching them up myself. My large hands, his hands, trembled as I cleaned the wounds, the antiseptic stinging. You're bleeding, I murmured, my voice thick with concern, tracing a small cut on his forearm, my forearm. It's superficial, he replied, his voice gruff, but he didn't pull away. It's not to me, I whispered, dabbing gently at the cut. Silence again, but softer. A fragile bridge forming between us. The sterile scent of antiseptic mingled with the lingering smell of gunpowder and the faint, sweet perfume of the roses blooming outside. For a moment, the world outside the mansion, the world of violence and power, faded away. It was just us, two souls utterly out of place, bound by an impossible circumstance. The quiet hum of the mansion's ventilation system was the only sound in the vast, opulent bedroom. My hands, large and surprisingly steady despite the tremors in my soul, carefully applied a fresh bandage to the cut on Dominic's forearm. He watched me, his expression unreadable, my own face a mask of weary intensity. The air between us, once thick with tension, now felt charged, not with hostility, but with something new, something undefined. You're surprisingly gentle, he observed, his voice, my voice, a low murmur. I shrugged, a movement that felt strange in his powerful shoulders. I've patched up a lot of scrapes, and not just my own. I thought of the stray cats, the clumsy friends, the perpetually bruised knees of my former life. It's not rocket science. He didn't respond, simply continued to watch me, his gaze unwavering. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but contemplative. When I finished, I stepped back, admiring my handiwork. There, I said, a small sense of accomplishment blooming in my chest. Good as new. He flexed his arm, testing the bandage. You endangered yourself, he stated, not a question, but an accusation. You endangered me, I countered, meeting his gaze. That's my body, Dominic. The one I have to live with. I couldn't just let you walk into a war zone in it. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher, annoyance. Grudging respect, crossing his features. I can handle myself, Aiden. Regardless of the vessel. I know you can, I admitted, looking away. Suddenly feeling the weight of the day pressing down on me. But I was worried. The words, spoken again, hung in the air, a fragile offering. He sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of his entire empire. I am not accustomed to such sentiment. Well, get used to it, I mumbled, turning to collect the medical supplies. You're stuck with me. He rose from the edge of the bed, moving with a fluid grace that was inherently his. Even in my body. He walked to the window, staring out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. A sprawling tapestry of power and potential. This arrangement, he began, his voice low, is untenable. I turned, my heart sinking. You want to switch back, don't you? He turned to face me, his expression grim. It is not a matter of want. It is a matter of necessity. My organization requires a leader. A physical presence that commands respect, not one that bakes cookies and adopts stray animals. Hey, I protested, feeling a prickle of indignation. The cookies are delicious and Gunther is a very good boy. Gunther, he repeated, the name aside. My men are confused, Aiden. They see me, in your body, issuing orders, handling negotiations. Then they see you, in my body, planting roses and cuddling felines. The dichotomy is destabilizing. I am ruining your life, aren't I? I said quietly, the anger draining out of me, replaced by a wave of melancholy. You are, he agreed bluntly, his gaze unwavering. My shoulders slumped. A familiar feeling of inadequacy washed over me, a sensation I'd known well in my own life, but which felt amplified in this powerful alien body. I felt like a child playing dress-up in a king's robes. Then he continued, his voice softer, almost hesitant. But the mansion feels different. I looked up, hope, a tiny, fragile thing, blooming in my chest. It feels less empty, he admitted, his eyes sweeping around the room, taking in the subtle changes I'd made, the small touches of color, the faint scent of jasmine from the fresh flowers I'd placed on his nightstand. My heart squeezed, a bittersweet ache. I don't want to be you, I whispered, the confession raw and honest. I don't want you to be alone. He stepped closer, his smaller frame still radiating an undeniable presence. Even in my body, he felt overwhelming. He stopped just inches from me, forcing me to look down at my own face, now so familiar yet so profoundly alien. You are afraid of guns, he stated, his voice a quiet observation. Yes, you replaced ammunition with mint leaves. It smelled nicer. I mumbled defensively. And yet, he said slowly, his eyes searching mine, you walked into a gunfight because you were worried about me. I swallowed, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. Yes. He reached up, my hand touching his own face, but my skin. His fingers, slender and surprisingly warm, traced the curve of my cheekbone, the line of my jaw. The touch was light, exploratory, sending an unexpected jolt through me. You are stronger than you believe, Aiden Hart, he murmured, his gaze holding mine. And perhaps I am not as alone as I thought. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The proximity, the intimacy of the moment, was suffocating. I felt a blush creep up my neck, a foreign sensation in this body that usually exuded cold control. We need to find a way to switch back, he said, breaking the spell, his voice returning to its usual controlled cadence. This cannot be permanent. I know, I agreed, disappointment a dull ache in my chest. But how? The lightning, the kiss, it was all so random. Random events often have underlying patterns. He mused, a flicker of his strategic mind appearing even through the haze of our bizarre situation. We must recreate the conditions precisely. The rain, the impact, the kiss. Weeks later, we stood in the same dark alley. It was meticulously cleaned now, swept and hosed down by Dominic's men, a faint smell of disinfectant lingering in the damp air. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of rain. We had been waiting for 2 hours, watching the weather reports with an intensity usually reserved for global market fluctuations. Are you sure about this? I asked, my voice laced with apprehension. My heart thumped a nervous rhythm against his ribs. We have exhausted all other avenues, he stated, his voice calm, resolute. Ancient texts, obscure rituals, scientific theories, none offered a solution. This is our only lead. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and sparse at first, then gathering momentum, pattering against the slick asphalt. Streetlights cast long, distorted shadows. The air grew heavy with the scent of wet concrete and exhaust fumes. It's starting, I whispered, a shiver running down my spine. We stood awkwardly, facing each other. He in my body, looking small and determined. Me, in his body, feeling like a clumsy giant. Maybe, I suggested, my voice tight. We just need to recreate it perfectly. The run, the impact. You want to run into me again, he said, a hint of dry amusement in his voice. Yes, but slower this time. And intentionally. He nodded. Very well. Begin. I took a deep breath, trying to channel the frantic energy of that first night. I backed up a few paces, then started to jog, picking up speed, aiming for him. It felt absurd. Like a bizarre, dangerous dance. He stood his ground, a small, unyielding presence in the downpour. As I reached him, I deliberately stumbled, mimicking my original clumsy fall. My hand instinctively reached out, grabbing his tie. His body, my body, bent slightly under the impact, and my lips, his lips, met his. This time, there was no accidental collision, no frantic desperation. It was soft, intentional. My large hands, still clutching his tie, felt the warmth of his neck, the fragile pulse beneath my fingers. His lips, my lips, were surprisingly pliant, a stark contrast to their previous rigidness. The rain plastered our clothes to our bodies, cold rivulets running down our faces, mingling with the warmth of our breaths. A strange warmth spread through me, a slow burn that had nothing to do with the physical contact, and everything to do with the quiet understanding that had grown between us. It was a kiss of shared experience, of reluctant respect, of an odd, unexpected camaraderie. Light flashed again, not lightning this time, but an internal explosion. A blinding white that consumed everything. The world spun, a dizzying kaleidoscope of colors and sensations. A powerful jolt, like 1,000 volts surging through my veins, ripped through me. A sensation both painful and exhilarating. Then, darkness. When I opened my eyes, the world was no longer spinning. The first thing I noticed was the familiar lightness of my own hands. Small, calloused. My hands. I flexed my fingers, a profound sense of relief washing over me. I was back, in my body. Across from me, Dominic sat up slowly. Broad shoulders, muscular arms, the intricate tattoo snaking up his bicep. He was back, in his body. We stared at each other, the silence profound, but this time, it was a silence of awe, of shared wonder. You're you? I whispered, my voice, my own voice, sounding ridiculously high-pitched and fragile. And you're you, he replied, his voice, deep and resonant, a familiar comfort. He stood, his movements fluid, powerful. I thought he would leave, that he would simply turn and walk away, back to his empire, leaving me to my detritus, spatula-wielding existence. Instead, he walked to the closet. His closet, the one in his bedroom, the one I had occupied for weeks. He opened it, revealing a meticulously organized array of expensive suits and shirts. He reached in and took out the pink apron, the one that said, "Kiss the cook but gently." He walked back towards me, the absurd garment draped over his arm. He held it out. "You left this in my kitchen," he said, his expression unreadable. Our kitchen. The thought, unbidden, bloomed in my mind. "You're not mad?" I asked nervously, my eyes wide. He looked at me, a long, careful assessment. "My empire is stronger," he stated, his voice calm, authoritative. "My men are loyal. The mansion is alive." His gaze swept around the room, lingering on the small, personal touches. I'd added the vase of fresh roses on the dresser, the cat tree I'd smuggled in for Gunther. He stepped closer, the pink apron still in his hand. "But if you replace ammunition again with mint leaves, Aiden Hart," he said, his eyes glinting with a familiar, dangerous amusement, "I will make you kneel on a keyboard." I laughed, a genuine, bubbling sound of relief and joy. "You like lecturing me, didn't you?" It was effective, he conceded, a faint, almost imperceptible curve to his lips. He brushed his thumb gently across my cheek, a soft, lingering touch that sent shivers down my spine. "You will stay." It wasn't a question. It was a command, a quiet, undeniable truth. "Yes," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will stay." "And the cats?" I asked nervously, remembering my furry charges. He sighed, a deep, long-suffering sound. "Gunther may remain." I threw my arms around him, a spontaneous, joyful embrace. He stiffened, his body rigid with surprise. Then, slowly, tentatively, his strong arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer. His embrace was firm, protective, and surprisingly, wonderfully warm. The scent of him, expensive cologne, a faint hint of gunpowder, and something uniquely Dominic filled my senses. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly, completely home. The world, now right side up, felt intensely real. My own skin, my own bones, the familiar thrum of my own heart. It was a symphony of belonging I hadn't realized I'd missed so profoundly. Dominic's arms, strong and protective, tightened around me, a silent promise in their embrace. His scent, a complex blend of expensive cologne, faint gun oil, and something uniquely Dominic, filled my senses, grounding me. I pulled back slightly, my hands resting on his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath the silk of his shirt. His gaze, dark and intense, held mine. The air hummed with unspoken things. "So," I began, a nervous laugh bubbling up, "I guess we're not switching back anytime soon." A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched his lips. "I believe the universe has made its point." "What point is that?" I challenged playfully, though my heart still fluttered with the aftermath of the switch and the surprising warmth of his embrace. "That some forms of chaos," he murmured, his thumb brushing over my cheekbone, "are necessary." My breath hitched. The simple admission, coming from the meticulously controlled Dominic Valentino, felt monumental. He wasn't just tolerating me, he was acknowledging my impact. "And the pink apron?" I prompted, gesturing to the silk garment still draped over his arm. He looked down at it, then back at me. "A reminder of efficiency." "Efficiency?" I scoffed, bumping his chest gently. "It's a reminder that a kitchen should smell like vanilla, not fear." He didn't argue. Instead, he simply looked at me, a depth of emotion in his eyes I'd never seen before, not even when they were my own. "You will stay." The words were a quiet command, a statement of intent that left no room for doubt. "I know," I whispered, leaning into his touch. "And I want to." "Good." He dropped the apron onto a nearby chaise lounge, then took my hand, his fingers intertwining with mine. "Come, there are things we need to discuss. Matters of integration." Over the next few months, life in the Valentino mansion became a fascinating, sometimes absurd, blend of old and new. Dominic still ran the Underworld. His days were a precise ballet of strategic meetings, tense negotiations, and the occasional, swift application of force, but the mansion itself, his personal domain, had been irrevocably altered. The herb garden in the former weapons room flourished, its fragrant bounty now supplying the kitchen and a small, discreet tea room I'd established in what used to be a rather grim waiting area. The dining hall, while still hosting high-stakes business dinners, also frequently smelled of cookies and other baked goods. Antoine, the chef, had initially despaired, but I'd won him over with my grandmother's secret spice blend for his coke oven. He now tolerated my pink apron with a resigned sigh, even occasionally asking for my opinion on a new dessert. The staff, once perpetually on edge, now moved with a lighter step. Enzo, the head of security, started humming while on patrol. I remembered birthdays, inquired about sick family members, and even organized a weekly movie night in the mansion's opulent, but previously unused, theater room. Morale, Dominic dryly noted, had improved by 37%. The cats, Gunther, mittens, and shadow, now roamed freely, their soft paws padding silently across the marble floors. Gunther, true to his name, still harbored a fierce independence but had developed a grudging affection for Dominic, occasionally deigning to rub against his expensive suits. He's asserting dominance, I explained one morning, watching Gunther weave between Dominic's legs at breakfast. Dominic, sipping his espresso, merely raised an eyebrow. Or he senses an opportunity for a territorial claim on my ankles. He likes you, I insisted, nudging Gunther with my foot. He just has a weird way of showing it. I understand, Dominic said, a hint of something unreadable in his gaze. Some of us do. Our relationship, too, had shifted into something far more complex than either of us could have predicted. There was an easy camaraderie born of shared trauma and mutual understanding. We argued, sometimes fiercely, over the placement of a new rose bush versus a security camera, or the merits of a new cookie recipe versus a new weapon shipment. Aiden. We are discussing the logistical nightmare of importing illegal firearms from Eastern Europe. Dominic stated one evening, his voice tight with exasperation. He sat at his massive desk, surrounded by maps and schematics. Your input on the optimal baking temperature for macarons is not required. I leaned against the doorway, a freshly baked macaron in my hand. But think of the psychological advantage, Dominic. Imagine your rivals are expecting a raid, a show of force, and instead, they receive a box of perfectly piped, lavender-flavored macarons. It disarms them. Literally. I popped the macaron into my mouth, savoring the delicate crunch and creamy filling. He stared at me, a muscle ticking in his jaw. You are suggesting we defeat our enemies with confectionery. It worked for the Trojan horse, didn't it? I countered, grinning. Except instead of soldiers, it's tiny, delicious treats. Who would suspect? He closed his eyes for a moment, a slow, deliberate breath escaping him. Get out. Fine, I said, turning to leave, but not before placing a single, perfect pistachio macaron on his neatly organized desk. Just try it. For science. Later that night, I found the macaron box empty, and a faint, sweet aroma lingering in his office. The tension, however, was never far. The Underworld was a brutal place, and even with Aiden's softening influence, Dominic remained the apex predator. Rival gangs still tested his boundaries, and sometimes those tests turned violent. One particularly brutal skirmish left Dominic with a deep gash on his forearm and a bullet graze on his shoulder. He returned to the mansion late, his face grim, his expensive suit torn and bloodied. I met him at the door, my heart seizing at the sight. You're hurt, I said, rushing forward, my voice thick with concern. He waved away Enzo, who was moving to assist. It's nothing. Nothing. You're bleeding like a stuck pig, I gently but firmly guided him towards the medical wing, already barking orders for the doctor. Sit down. Let me see. The doctor, a stern man named Dr. Rossi, who had seen far too many of Dominic's injuries, quickly cleaned and stitched the wounds. I hovered, a worried shadow, my hands clenching, and uncling. When Dr. Rossi finished, Dominic started to get up. Stay, I commanded, pushing him back down gently. You need to rest. He looked at me, a flash of annoyance in his eyes, but he didn't argue. He leaned back, his head against the cool leather of the examination table. I sat beside him, taking his uninjured hand, tracing the lines of his palm. I hate this, I whispered, my voice raw. I hate that you have to do this. It is my life, Aiden, he said, his voice quiet. My responsibility. But it's dangerous. Every time you leave, I worry. He turned his head, his gaze meeting mine. You always worry. Someone has too, I retorted, a small smile touching my lips. Your men are too busy being terrified of you. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that was rare and always disarmed me. Perhaps, he squeezed my hand. But my empire is stronger now. More resilient. Because of the macarons. He sighed, a long-suffering sound, but there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. Because of the loyalty you inspire. The warmth. That night, after the household had settled and the mansion was quiet, I found him in his study, staring out at the city lights. He had changed into a silk robe, but his face was still etched with fatigue. Can't sleep? I asked softly, stepping into the room. He turned, his gaze sweeping over me. Too much administrative work. He gestured vaguely at the stacks of papers on his desk. I walked over, standing beside him at the window. You know, I began, my voice quiet. When I was in your body, I understood a little bit of the weight you carry. The decisions, the responsibility. It's a lot. He nodded, his eyes still on the sprawling metropolis. It is the price of power. And what's the price of not being alone? I asked, turning to face him. He looked at me then, his dark eyes searching mine. The city lights reflected in their depths, 1,000 tiny fires. He reached out, his hand gently cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. Perhaps, he murmured, his voice a low thrum that vibrated through me. It is the most valuable price of all. He leaned in, slowly, giving me time to react, to pull away. But I didn't. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut as his lips met mine. This kiss was different from the one in the alley. There was no lightning, no accidental collision, no desperate attempt to switch back. This was soft, deliberate, and undeniably sensual. His lips, firm and warm, moved against mine, a slow, tender exploration. I parted my lips slightly, inviting him deeper. His tongue, slick and warm, traced the seam of my mouth, a gentle coaxing. I responded, my own tongue meeting his, a tentative dance of discovery. A gasp escaped me as his hand slid from my jaw to the nape of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, tilting my head back slightly. The kiss deepened, becoming more urgent, more consuming. His other hand found my waist, pulling me closer until my body was pressed flush against his. I felt the hard planes of his chest, the warmth of his skin through the thin silk of his robe. My hands, finding their own way, slid around his waist, clinging to him. The kiss became a slow, intoxicating swirl of sensation. His tongue explored the contours of my mouth, tasting, teasing, eliciting soft moans from deep in my throat. I felt a delicious heat bloom low in my belly, spreading through my veins like warm honey. My hips instinctively pressed into his, a silent plea for more. The faint scent of antiseptic from his healing wound mingled with his natural musk and the lingering sweetness of the macarons, creating a heady cocktail that intoxicated my senses. He broke the kiss slowly, reluctantly, his forehead resting against mine, his breath mingling with mine. His eyes, dark and heavy-lidded, gazed into mine, filled with a raw intensity that made my knees weak. Aiden, he whispered, his voice husky, almost a plea. Dominic, I breathed, my own voice shaky. His lips found mine again, this time with a fierce urgency, a claiming. His hand slid lower, cupping my ass, lifting me slightly until my hips were cradled against his. I felt the hard ridge of his erection pressing against me through the silk, a thrilling confirmation of his desire. My legs, instinctively wrapped around his waist, pulling me even tighter against him. He carried me then, without breaking the kiss, across the study and into his vast bedroom. He laid me gently on the cool, silk sheets of his bed, following me down, his body a heavy, delicious weight on mine. The silk robe parted, revealing the smooth, muscular expanse of his chest. His fingers, deft and unhesitant, began to unbutton my shirt, his eyes never leaving mine. Each button released felt like a small explosion of anticipation. He stripped me slowly, deliberately, his gaze devouring every inch of skin he revealed. When my shirt was gone, he traced the curve of my collarbone, the dip of my sternum, eliciting shivers that had nothing to do with the cool air. His lips followed, a trail of fire down my throat, across my chest, suckling gently at my nipples until they hardened into sensitive peaks. A low moan escaped me, and he swallowed it with another deep kiss. My hands, restless and eager, found the silk of his robe, pulling it open. His body, hard and sculpted, was a masterpiece. I ran my palms over his abs, feeling the top muscle clench under my touch. He groaned, a deep, guttural sound that thrilled me to my core. He shifted, rising slightly to shed his robe, then peeled away my remaining clothes with a practiced ease that hinted at a hidden, passionate nature. Soon, we lay naked on the silk, skin against skin, the friction igniting a wildfire between us. His cock, thick and heavy, pulsed against my thigh, already wet with pre-cum. My pussy, a throbbing ache between my legs, was slick and ready for him. He moved between my legs, his knees nudging mine apart, and I opened for him, eager, wanting. He positioned himself, his cock pressing against my wet entrance, a tantalizing pressure. He leaned down, kissing me deeply, drinking in my whimpers as he slowly, deliberately pushed inside. The first penetration was a slow, exquisite stretch, a feeling of fullness that bordered on pain, then melted into pure, unadulterated pleasure. I gasped, arching into him, wanting him deeper. All of him. He filled me, stretching me, a perfect, snug fit. I felt the delicious schlick of his wet cock sliding within me, the squelch of our bodies joining. He began to move, a slow, rhythmic thrust, each stroke deeper than the last. My hips rose to meet his, desperate for the sensation. The bed creaked softly beneath us, the only sound apart from our ragged breaths and the wet sounds of our bodies intertwining. He moved with a powerful, primal grace, his balls slapping softly against my ass with each thrust. Dominic, I cried out, my voice hoarse, my fingers digging into the firm muscle of his back. He lowered his head, his lips finding my neck, sucking a love bite into the sensitive skin. Mine. He growled, his voice rough with desire. The rhythm built, faster, more insistent. My pussy gripped him tightly, milking him with every thrust. The pleasure was overwhelming, a tidal wave building higher and higher. I felt myself nearing the edge, my body trembling, convulsing around him. I'm close, I whimpered, clinging to him. He paused, a single, deep thrust, holding me there, then pulled back slightly. Not yet, he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. He wanted to watch me break. He wanted to feel me shatter around him. He began to thrust again, a relentless, punishing rhythm that pushed me further, higher. My orgasm hit like a lightning bolt, a violent, beautiful explosion of sensation that rippled through every nerve ending. My body arched, my pussy clenching around his cock, milking him with desperate intensity. I cried out, a long, keening sound, my nails raking his back. He watched me, his eyes dark with triumph, then let out a guttural groan, his own release following swiftly. He pumped into me, his body rigid, his cock pulsing, filling me with his hot, sticky cum. He collapsed onto me, his weight a welcome burden, his heart hammering against my back. We lay there for a long time, tangled together, our bodies slick with sweat and other fluids. The scent of sex heavy in the air. The world outside, the empire, the chaos, all faded into insignificance. There was only us, two souls intertwined, finding solace and passion in the most unexpected of places. Months later, Dominic still ran the underworld. His grip remained firm, his reputation unchallenged. There were still guns, still whispered threats, still the dark undercurrent of power that defined his world. But when he returned to the mansion, tired and often bearing the invisible scars of his work, there were also roses blooming in the courtyard, their fragrance a gentle balm. There were cupcakes waiting in the kitchen, their sweetness a small, comforting reward. And sometimes when no one was looking, when the mansion was quiet and only I was there to witness it, the most feared Mafia boss in the city would wear a custom pink apron. It hung, proudly, in the chef's area, a silent testament to the gentle chaos I had brought into his life. He wore it only for me, a private joke, a shared secret. And if anyone ever dared to laugh about it, well, they never laughed twice.